Welcome everybody to WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle this week. We are less than 2 weeks before the opener, which means that people should be making their plans to get to Vegas if they haven't. If you show up in Vegas, Mark will buy you a drink. No questions asked. Usual crew today. We're going to talk about what there is to talk about, the stuff that Lincoln Riley hasn't kept under wraps, and we'll go from there. All right, guys. I hinted at already. Look, there was a scrimmage the other day. Some people got to watch the scrimmage. You guys got to watch the scrimmage. We can't really talk about it. Coach's order. So, what can we report from fall camp at this point? Can you give us a piece of good news? And go ahead and give us whatever it is that you're hearing or seeing that concerns you. Who wants to start? Mark, you look anxious. Why don't you start us off?
I'll start, sure. And this has nothing to do with what I may have had or may have not have seen at the scrimmage. This is just my own gut reaction in case anybody's looking over my shoulder right now. So, everybody's concerned about, is USC's defensive line going to be able to hold up for an entire game against LSU's offensive line? LSU's got this big, huge, strong offensive line, a couple of bookends that are anticipated to go into the 2025 NFL draft. And I said, you know what? I think USC's got a pretty big offensive line. So I checked the sizes. And when you add it all up, starter versus starter, USC's defensive line is actually practicing against an offensive line that weighs more than LSU's corn dogs. So I'm thinking that might be a good sign. And if they've been going up against these guys through spring camp, summer PRPs, and now through fall camp, and what are we, 12 days away when the show is being published from USC playing the game? I think the defensive line is going to be tested. I don't think they're going to arrive in Las Vegas. They're going to look across the field and go, oh my God, what's that? They're not going to be overwhelmed. So I think that's some good news that I'm kind of sensing coming out of fall camp. And it also assuages my concern coming into fall camp. Is USC's defense going to be strong enough to hold up against the run? And I think they are going to be. We were talking about this pregame. Who they have on the roster, who they brought in, where the pieces are starting to fit. Look, I'm not saying this is going to be a great defense. I'm not saying they're going to have the number 2 run defense in the country like UCLA had last year. But they have the same person teaching USC the defense that they taught at UCLA last year. It's got to count for something, right?
Yeah, seems to me it does. Anything you're worried about? Are you worry-free? Are you worry-free, Mark?
I'm worried. What am I worried about? I'm worried about there might not be enough touches for all the skill position players. Rich people problem.
Yeah.
Mark's worried they might be too good this year.
Right? There you go. Mr. Negative over here. Mr. Negative over here.
There was that there's that story they tell about John McKay with the practices in 1972, where they were coming off 2 seasons where they'd won 6 games each year, and at some point, with a few practices still remaining on the schedule, McKay just kind of declares, I think we're ready, which turns out to be right. I don't know if Lincoln Riley's there. It sounds like Mark might be, but yeah.
And just the other day, I'm saying temper your enthusiasm. So look, there's still 2 weeks to go. Nobody in the country is ready to play a game if you're kicking off today or tomorrow. Nobody, not even Georgia.
No, that's true. That's true. And by the way, Georgia's head coach, Kirby Smart, was just complaining about the lack of depth they have at Georgia at this point, which, I think his depth problems are a little different than everybody else's. That might be a little bit like Mark Zuckerberg complaining about his bank account, but at the same time, it's true. USC fans forget that while there are problems on the roster, while there are weaknesses, while there are question marks, everybody has those. Like, everybody has those. Even Georgia has their question marks. They'll solve them. I don't doubt that. But if you're not in the elite 2 or 3 teams, you've got things on the roster that you wish you could fix. You have places on the roster where you don't have the talent or the depth. That's true for everybody. It's true for SC too. I do agree with you, Mark, on the D line. Eric, what do you think? What's the good news? Do we have any good news?
We've always got good news.
All right.
I go to not anything I saw. Jerry DiNardo, when the Big Ten Network made their stop here, one of the things that he came away with was that he really liked what USC had in that front seven, defensive line and linebackers. And so he's the guy that's seen all the programs, right? He can say what Ohio State looks like and what Michigan looks like, and then compare it to what USC looks like. For him to come out and say his concern is the back end of the defense, which, my goodness, if that's the worst part of the USC defense this year, that's fine with me. For him to say, hey, I think that they are pretty solid up front, that to me is a big green flag. And what we've kind of seen and heard, where no, they didn't land, your Bear Alexander of this offseason along the defensive line. There were some guys they chased that ended up elsewhere. You ended up with Gavin Meyer, which I know, when he committed, USC fans, I don't think we're going, that's the guy we needed. But it sounds like he's fit in really well and doing well. So for them to be able to kind of, again, that box isn't checked, right? I know Mark had the numbers about LSU. Like that is a test. That is a test out of the box where you're going to go up against a really, really good LSU offensive line. But yeah, the fear of, we're going to get pushed back 30 yards and just let teams kind of do whatever they want. That seems to be not gone, but not right at the top of the list of the terrifying potential things for this season. So for me, that is because the defense was going to be right topics 1 through 40 of what we were going to talk about this offseason. The offense is kind of cruise control, and if they score 20 points in a game, we'll kind of talk about it then. But the expectation is not that they're going to come out and not do their job. How could they figure things out defensively up front? And I think there's some good news, at least a little bit, for right now. The flip side, if you're looking at kind of concerns, we've heard a lot about, this guy's versatile and this guy's flashing and the potential here is good. When Tuli Tuipulotu was here, right, it was like, we can't have him on the field because he's ruining drills. Like he's wrecking practice because he's that good. Are there guys like that, right? Do you have the elite talent? And when you look at, I know the preseason lists don't mean anything, but USC doesn't, right? Caleb Williams was at like the top of every list going into last year of the top guys, and then he's really good. You want to have those guys. USC doesn't right now feel like they have those guys that have proven it and are just a absolute surefire, star this season. So again, I'm not concerned coming out of here. I'm actually feeling better, I think. Looking back to February of like what the year could look like. But that to me, maybe it's something if you have to pick something. You're not hearing a ton about like this guy's going to be, a Heisman Trophy candidate or an absolute, first team All-American this year.
Yeah. So I think, look, the defensive line is the right place to start because that's what we were all concerned about. And a couple of things. USC's not too small up front. That's what everybody thought was going to be the case. It's not the case. They're not too small up front. They're not small at all up front. They have a ton of 300-pounders on the roster. Now, all 300-pounders are not created alike, right? I mean, there are plenty of guys that are Aaron Donald size who don't play like Aaron Donald. So just because you're big doesn't mean you're going to be any good. But it's hard to be good up front if you don't have some size. USC does have some size. USC also has some elite talent. I don't know if the guys will play that way. We don't know that yet, right? But if you just look at it, you look at the Bear Alexander, Braylon Shelby, and Cameron Fountain, and Anthony Lucas. Let's just take those 4 guys. Those 4 guys are elite talents. I don't know if Anthony Lucas will play like an elite talent. He didn't last year. I know that. You know that. But he is an elite talent in terms of the body that God has given him, right? Not a lot of guys look like that and can move like that. And that's true of all those guys. So when you look at USC and you say, I don't know that, they're not big enough. Yes, they are. I don't think they have much talent. Well, they do have talent. Some of those young guys have talent too. They're probably not ready to go and dominate Michigan's offensive line, those freshman defensive tackles. But the idea that USC doesn't have talent is just not true. They do. They have enough talent to be a good defense. Okay. And the question is whether this coaching staff can coach them up. I think they can. I mean, if it would be nice if this was the second year of this defensive coaching staff instead of the first, but I think they can. I think they can and will. And look, coaching makes a big difference. And if even if you had the exact same roster, if you lose Alex Grinch and you find Anton Lynn, you have made a major upgrade, like a major upgrade. And in the article I wrote this past week, I referred to Grinch as Tommy Boy, actually an inebriated Tommy Boy, being replaced by Jack Welch as a business executive. That strikes me as a little bit of an exaggeration, but maybe not that much of one. I mean, it's a huge upgrade. And so I think that is good news. I think USC has the horses up front to play good defense. I don't know if they'll be great. We'll see how quickly they catch on to this program, but I think they can be good. The other good news is very few serious injuries so far. Right? I mean, you read about this all the time. These programs being devastated by injuries in fall. I mean, Texas has had some brutal ones in their backfield and offensive line. Notre Dame lost their left tackle. I mean, that's a bad thing. USC has one guy out for the season. It's at a position where they're going to be okay. So far, so good on that, because you really want to go into that first game with all your best guys on the field, especially a first game like LSU. So that's also good news. Concerns? I mean, we've listed the concerns all year. They haven't really gone away. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic about the defense. I'm cautiously optimistic about the offensive line, but the defense and the offensive line weren't any good last year, and they haven't proven anything yet. So those are still question marks, and they probably will be for a while. But stay healthy on the offensive line, especially offensive tackle. Stay healthy at linebacker. Stay healthy at quarterback. This team may surprise some people. That's my guess. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about we skipped over last week. We had other things to talk about, but there was this discussion about Elijah Page and how he went down to the scout team last year and how he benefited playing on the scout team. So let's talk a little bit about just the importance of the scout team. It may be that there are casual football fans that don't really know what the heck the scout team is or what those guys are doing. We should talk about that a little bit. I'm happy to. I ventured onto the scout team once or twice. And then let's talk about who we think is going to make noise on the scout team this season. Eric, lead us off. Give us a scout team discussion, Eric.
Yeah, scout team. We put Mark on the scout team for a while before we brought him up to this show. I think it
did not help. Did not help.
See, I was going to say did wonders there.
I'm still here.
So yeah, right. They mimic the opposing offense or defense, run those plays, get your team as ready as possible to see what you think they're gonna see. You hear it credited a lot when when a play goes right, they'll talk about it. Hey, scout team gave us a great look. They ran that play really well. We were ready for it, or we were ready to attack that defensive look. And so it also, right, if you're on scout team, chances are you're not playing in that week, or you're not playing potentially that season, and you can kind of taxi squad up and down. But yeah, that seemed to be sort of a real turning point for Elijah Page. And what it sounds like they did is they sent him down there and kind of beat him up a little bit, right? It was a physical, you need to drag yourself off of this and get back into that too deep and where you're running with the offense in your actual jersey number and not what Oregon's left tackle's jersey number for practice there, where you're, mimicking that guy. So again, it can be a helpful sort of, wake up call ish, but also just gradually getting you into the speed of going against a starting player at this level. Looking at this year, it's kind of interesting, right? You look on the offensive line, and I think those freshman offensive linemen jump up there, but I'm actually going to go on the defense. So look, Carlon Jones and Mana Bulabalavu, those two guys are big enough, and Jade Abasiri too in there. Like, they might play this year. They also might benefit a whole lot from the Elijah Page thing in getting ready for next year, right? You send them down there and they have to go against Jonah Monheim in practices, kind of at whatever speed you're running those things at. Maybe that helps you more than trying to just like grab onto the third string or fourth string rung at defensive tackle. So those are guys that I think could get helped out a whole lot, even though, we've talked about this too. If there's any position where it's kind of all hands on deck, can we get anything from anybody? Defensive tackle might be where you look for first. But for me, a lot of times it's those big guys, just getting used to what does it look like in here? How much different is it here, mixing it up right on the ball in college compared to high school? So I think those are a few guys that could take a pretty significant jump this year, because you're going to need them next year. I mean, you're absolutely going to need those guys to play well and play a lot next year.
Yeah. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, no, Eric nailed it. They sent Elijah Page over there. He got jumped in. He had to prove himself. And, he came out of there. He was swinging, and now he's, the presumptive starting left tackle this year. And, Eric talked about the big guys on the defensive line that are going to possibly make an impact playing scout. Same thing applies for the freshman offensive linemen. They're going to have to find reps somewhere because they're not going to get it during practice during fall camp. So again, go over there, get your butts kicked, show what you can do up against USC's defensive line, and then be prepared for the following season. And I think there's going to be a running back from USC's group that's probably going to show out during the scout this year. That's just the way it's going to be. You have Woody Marks, you have the two freshmen from last year, and you have Brian Jackson. One of those four, somebody's not getting touches this year playing running back for USC. One of them is going to end up on that scout team, and one of them is going to be turned into a really good running back, running behind that offensive line that's being groomed for the following year. So there's a lot of potential, and that's why you see so many young guys are going to be scout team impact players this year.
Yeah, USC may have a 3-star running back from Texas who shouldn't have been a 3-star, who's going to do some damage in practice and hopefully on Saturdays at some point soon. Here's what people don't understand about the scout team, because everybody talks about, we got to go one-on-ones and, iron sharpens iron, but you can't have the ones go against the ones all the time, not just because of injuries, but because the whole point of practice is you're trying to show your offense or your defense what the opponent does. You're trying to get them ready for that system. It makes no sense for you only to practice against your own system every day so you can do ones against ones. Yeah, you're playing your best guys against your best guys, and then they walk out on the field Saturday and they're seeing something they've never seen before, right? That's absurd. You can't do that. So the scout team is actually incredibly important, because these are the guys who are running an offensive or a defensive system that they don't know. A lot of times you're getting cue cards and you're looking at the cue card and this is where you're going to line up, and the better look they give, the less the difference between what you've been playing in practice and what you're playing on Saturdays. And you hear from from Pete Carroll's old guys how practice was harder than Saturdays, and that's because of how physical the practices were and the number of good athletes you had on even on the scout team. But the truth is, if you don't want Saturdays to be hard, you can't be looking at stuff for the first time on Saturday. So the scout team, you have to have a scout team. The truth is, if your scout team is undermanned, then you're going to beat up on those guys and you're not going to learn very much. And so it is great for young guys to play on the scout team. I remember as a sophomore in high school, on the swing team where I played in the JV games, I'd play little special teams for the varsity. The sophomores that were on that were all on the scout team, and we just got our heads caved in every day, just every single day. We we had a guy on our team that went and played for Lou Holtz at Notre Dame and had a cup of coffee for the Chicago Bears, and that's a guy that I was trying to block. That's a guy I was trying to break tackles against, and he just beat the tar out of me. When I heard that story about Elijah Page, I said, I understand what that's all about, right? You are fighting for your life every play, every day. That does wonders for a guy, right? If you're mentally tough and you want to get better, being put in that situation is going to help you tremendously. And so, the guys on the scout team will improve a lot doing what they're doing, but if they do their job well, the starters will also benefit. I agree with the 3 defensive linemen this year on the scout team. I also think the 3 freshman linebackers, that whole front 7, you got a bunch of freshman kids on that front 7 who I think are going to be really good football players. Elijah Newby, we've all been excited about, fantastic athlete, but the 2 Michigan linebackers are big, strong kids, and you got the big, strong defensive linemen, 300 pounds plus, all of them. That's a pretty good group to run your starting offensive line against. I think they'll get a good look from those guys, and those kids will make a huge jump this year dealing with the Jonah Monheims of the world. You just can't help it. Any other thoughts on young guys and scout team, and anybody we didn't mention that we should have mentioned? Who's the scout team quarterback this year?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, Jensen could go run it for you. They added a bunch of, I think, 3 young kind of walk-ons. Dylan Jebby is a guy that could potentially do that too. So it won't be Miller Moss or Jaden Mayava. Those guys won't be down there.
Okay.
It depends on week to week. Who's the opposing quarterback that week? And whoever USC has on their roster that can best mimic that type of player.
Yeah, and that shows just saying that shows how difficult it is to do, right? You can imagine guys who are getting ready to play USC the last 2 years, and you're trying to figure out who's going to mimic what Caleb Williams is going to bring, right? Unless your scout team quarterback is Pat Mahomes, there's nobody that can mimic what he's going to do. And so you're going to run into that sometimes. Nobody on that scout team offense is going to be able to mimic LSU's tackles. It's just not going to happen, right? I mean, those guys don't exist on the roster, so it's tough.
You can stack 2 guys up like chicken fighting in the pool, right? Put two towers of guys at tackle for that. And
maybe. I mean, I don't know that they're going to have the foot speed, but yes.
You think Malachi Nelson would consider coming back to be USC scout quarterback?
And not be Boise's? Look, that was a cheap shot. Look, it is. If you don't know what we're talking about,
Scout Team Human. Sorry, Chris. It's Scout Team Human.
Yeah, Malachi Nelson is not going to be the starter at Boise this year, which I think is probably a surprise to Malachi and everybody else. But he made his decision. I wish him the best. He'll probably get a chance to play at some point. Backups usually do. Okay. Couple of announcements. Actually, listen, if you're going to go to the game in Vegas, and you should, it'll be a fun experience. We are going to do a live taping of Inside the Trojans Huddle and combine that with a meet and greet. We're going to do it at the Palms on Saturday, the day before the game, Saturday at 10 a.m., which means that if you wanted to go to the pep rally, which is going to be at the Palms at 2 o'clock, just show up a little bit early. We'll give you more specific directions on exactly where to go at the Palms later. We'll put it up on the website. We'll probably send it on the email we send out if you're on the email list. But show up. It's going to be fun. We'll take questions from the audience. If there's something you've always wanted to say to one of us, assuming it's nice, you'll get a chance. If it's mean and it's about Mark or Eric, that's fine. You can do that too. But anyway, 10 o'clock at the Palms. Show up. It'll be a good time. Okay. Also, if you need tickets to that game, to any other USC game, to concerts, to just about anything, the Game Time app is what you want. Download the Game Time app, use the code ON3, O-N and the number 3, you get $20 off your first purchase. By the way, I did this, guys. I got Penn State tickets just the other day on Game Time, and the truth is, it was cheaper than my usual source. I usually go to. I'm not going to say who I usually go to. That runs counter to my advertising efforts right now. But Game Time got me good seats, or reasonably good seats, but the price was fantastic. So go there, download the Game Time app. Some terms apply. They're probably not too onerous. Create an account, redeem your code, get your money off, and get your tickets. So download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
That's a sellout.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's the only place you can get your tickets now.
USC LSU official sellout.
I mean, look, that is going to be a wild atmosphere in that stadium, especially if it's a good game, and I suspect it will be. I don't know how drunk the LSU fans will be, but it's an evening game, so I think the answer is like very, very drunk. And I don't know where I'm sitting. I mean, I know my seats are, but I don't know if it's more of a USC or an LSU. I mean, I could be surrounded by drunk LSU fans, which would be quite an experience. That may be. We may only have a couple shows left before that happens to me. Okay, let's move on. We got more to cover, I think. I can't remember what it is. There's my outline. All right, guys. One of the biggest storylines right now when it comes to special teams. We haven't talked a lot about special teams during the offseason. We certainly talked some about it last season because a lot of times it was disappointing. So, biggest storylines right now when it comes to special teams. McKinney, what do you think?
I think there's actually quite a bit. I mean, the special teams this might decide some games, right? We've talked about this USC team, and they could be in some tough stuff. You expect the defense to kind of rise up, get them some extra possessions for the offense, but these are potentially like some weather games, and you're talking this year and kind of down the line too. But no, can you return kicks? Can you kick the ball into the end zone on kickoffs? Those are two things that Lincoln Riley has talked about at length. And then they haven't really named a starting kicker or place kicker yet. I think Michael Lance is probably the guy to watch, right? You don't go into the portal and bring a kind of veteran experienced guy like that in if you don't have a real belief that he can be the guy for you. But we'll see. Dennis Lynch has always been a guy that Lincoln Riley has kind of pushed out there and said, hey, we love his work ethic and how he goes about this. One of the things that really strikes you when you look at Lynch's just field goal numbers are the number of like inside the 40 sort of what should be gimme ones that he missed. Like outside of 40, it was surprisingly good and accurate. You can't go empty down trips though when you think, okay, we got a 32-yard field goal, let's hit this in and then play defense. You got to make those. And so I think can you make all of those? And then can you set Zachariah Branch up to be a game changer? Like you need the ball in his hands with room to go on kickoffs and on punts. And so those I think this is one of those years, like you can win games if you push that advantage on special teams enough in one way. I think you can win some games because I don't think the defense is going to make you score 55 points a game to do that. So I think you can find a few different ways to win this year.
What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, no, Eric and I had this conversation before the scrimmage on Saturday. You're not going into Clay Helton's cabinet and saying, I need your best point producer and bring him to USC unless you have every intention of making him your starting place kicker. And it's exactly what Eric just mentioned. Dennis Lynch is great from long distance. Dude's clutch. But when you can't be counted on to make that chippy mid-range shot, that's an issue. My concern, though, is with overusing Zachariah Branch. assuming USC's defense is so good, and he's going to be back there receiving so many punts, the more times you put him back there, the more times you're putting him back there, exposing him to potential injury. So I'm hoping coming out of fall camp, they've got somebody else that they can really turn to on punt return or kickoff return. I think Mekhi Lemon is going to be one of those guys. When we watch him out there during practice, he's not just a flash in the pan. He's got some athleticism to him. When he puts that foot in the ground, he can go from 0 to 60 like that. I mean, there's power and speed and finesse all tied in together with Mekhi Lemon. So that's something that's a positive. Again, I don't want to see Zachariah Branch being overused, but at the same time, you know, when you want the ball in his hand as much as possible because he's a potential touchdown once he gets into open field. So yeah, I really do think that Michael Lance is going to be the place kicker. I think Eddie Plisky is going to be the punter. And now it's just a matter of who's going to complement Zachariah Branch receiving kicks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right about who's going to be kicking. And while it's true that USC hasn't announced who wins that job, they also haven't announced who's won the quarterback job. So I'm not sure we can make much of that. I do want Zach Branch overused on punt returns. Kickoff returns are a different story. One, much greater chance for injury on kickoff returns and punt returns. And two, USC was so bad blocking on kickoff returns last year that it got to the point where I didn't even want to see him back there. Because I knew if Zach was back there, he was going to field the kick, he was going to return it, and I also knew nobody's going to block for him. They'd get the ball at the 15-yard line. The effort they made on kickoff return last year was embarrassing. And I don't know who coached that unit, but they did a terrible job. Terrible, right? It was about as bad as you'll ever see when you have a first team All-American returner and the other team consistently kicks it high to him, forces him to return it because they know they're not going to block anybody. I mean, that was just horrific. They have to solve that problem. They have to. I'm with Mark that you need to have somebody else who can be relied upon to do that. Obviously, on punt returns, I don't really ever want to see anybody back there other than Zachariah because it is so frightening to have an elite punt returner. You know, you get your guys flying downfield. The first guy's going to miss, the second guy's going to miss, and it just changes things dramatically, field position wise too, because at some point you decide, well, if our gunners can't tackle him in the open field, then we're going to have to kick the ball to the sideline. And all of a sudden people start shanking kicks and, you know, you get a 3 and out and then they kick the ball 27 yards and now you're set up at midfield, right? I mean, this is what a great returner can do. So USC has to get better at that. I don't think I'm saying anything that they don't know. Lincoln Riley knows that the production there was awful considering the elite talent that they had. And I think some of these guys we talked about these freshman linebackers. I mean, if you want guys that can run down on a kickoff return team and block somebody, that's the kind of guy you want. You want a 235-pound linebacker that can move. So some of those guys will probably get their chance not only on the scout team but blocking for Zachariah Branch, which is not a terrible thing to do. Anything else on special teams? I mean, I thought the punting game was pretty decent last year. Should be good again.
I think coverage will be a little bit better just because they have more depth on the now with bigger, stronger, better players that they've been recruiting. So I think that's going to translate on the coverage as well.
Yeah, I think
it'll be right. And Ryan Doherty too, like the fact that he can coach and you don't have to, whatever those hoops were of if you're an analyst, you can be there, but you can't say anything or whatever that is, those being gone to where now, he could be on the field. He can actually coach the guys and be as involved as any other coach. When you don't have a special teams coordinator for, a long time, as Lincoln Riley has set this up for, like that's got to be a big bonus too, that now you pretty much have one of those guys.
Hey, is B&W giving on-field instruction at this point?
we don't see him like in huddles and being with it, but he can be there, yeah, as much as any of the other coaches.
I see him typically standing, looking, observing. Yeah, to what Eric said, you don't see him actually in there. Hey, Mackay, I need you to do this on that route. No, it's not that type of stuff going on that we see. Once they kick it out, who knows what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if I'm one of the big wide receivers on that roster, Deuce or Jacoby Lane, that's a guy whose brain I might want to pick.
You
If
pick.
they're half as good as Mike Williams was, they're going to have good careers. Okay, so we've been going through the big games on the roster, and now we're down to the last two, the two rivalry games. My impression, guys, is that we'll talk about UCLA first. They come up before Notre Dame on the schedule. My impression is this one used to feel bigger. It used to feel bigger. Back in the 80s, USC, UCLA felt bigger than this rivalry has felt over the last 10, 15 years. I think a big part of that is that UCLA football in the 80s was a legitimate program. And UCLA has not been a legitimate football program for some time now. They've had some seasons that were good, but for the most part, they were a top 2 or 3 team in the conference every year, and that just hasn't been the case for 20 years, 25 years. They've been garbage, and so they haven't upheld their end of the bargain, which is really too bad, because when USC and UCLA are both programs that are good, when the fan bases care, all of LA seems to care. It really captures the imagination of Southern California, and those games were a big deal. And so I mean, I never want good things to happen for UCLA. Don't get me wrong, but UCLA being good enough to bring that rivalry back to prominence wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I mean, can we say that? Can I say that without betraying without having to hand in my USC
Mark, what do you think?
football
That
card?
feels like something we'd lose multiple points
felt the point
for
just fell out
saying
of
later
my
later
mouth.
on, right?
You guys would get disqualified if you said that, but you guys aren't the judges.
Let me translate what Chris is trying to say. He
Yeah.
wants to feel a little bit more animosity between the programs. Am I hearing that, Chris?
That's exactly right. UCLA fans used to care about their football program. And there used to be a lot more banter between USC and UCLA people when you get to to rivalry week. It seems like a lot of that's gone away because UCLA just doesn't seem to care that much if they're any good. USC obviously has not held up their end of the bargain either for much of the last 15 years, but even so, USC has been much better than UCLA for most of the last decade and a half. UCLA's just been garbage. So I say all that as a lead-in to this. This has been an unbelievable rivalry over the 40 some odd years that I've been watching USC football. I mean, we could spend multiple hour-and-a-half programs just talking about big USC UCLA moments. So while so many traditions are disappearing in college football, this one's still alive, at least for now. So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about what makes this rivalry special. I asked Mark about that with Washington. He said not a thing, and it almost killed the show. I'll be honest. I almost didn't show up today because I was afraid he'd do it again. But I know he's not going to do that when I ask him about UCLA. So Mark, let's start with you. Redeem yourself, my friend.
Yes.
What makes this rivalry special?
Look, I said it. I love the animosity that just simmering at the bottom of the pot. When UCLA is good, and when I mean when they're good, it means they're ranked top 10, top 15. They have a legitimate shot of contending. They haven't been that, and USC has had their peaks and valleys, but everybody knows USC cares about football, UCLA cares about basketball, except for that one game when they play against USC. And lately, it just feels like when USC plays UCLA in football, it's got that same feeling that when USC plays Stanford. It's almost like, all right, well, we're here, we're going to play, and if we win, we're going to hang it over your heads for the season, but that's it. I think back to those games when USC played UCLA, and there were fights that almost happened on the field. You know, when you have Matt Barkley throwing a deep pass in the waning seconds of the game to Damian Williams because UCLA's head coach thought it was a good idea to call a timeout. I need stuff like that boiling to the top. That's what keeps this type of rivalry going, where the fans are enthusiastic. They look forward to it. I mean, USC was willing to lose a timeout so they could wear their home jersey when they played UCLA. I think both schools agreed to, let's just throw that rule out of the book. Everybody gets to wear their home jersey when they play each other. I need to see more, 27-0 type of games. I need to see more 50-0 type of games. That's what makes this rivalry so special, is when USC is dominating, every now and then you'll see UCLA chip coming in there with a 13-9 type of game. That's what makes this rivalry special. You don't like that feeling of losing 13-9, but you need it. Right now, USC, UCLA, it doesn't compare to Michigan, Ohio State. It doesn't compare to Alabama, Auburn. It doesn't compare to Texas, Oklahoma. The closest thing USC has to that type of rivalry is USC's versus Notre Dame. USC's 10 miles away from that other campus. This should be one of the dirtiest, meanest, most revered rivalries in all of college football. And like you said, Chris, UCLA doesn't pull their end of the bargain. They need to have another Bob Toledo type of era where there's a villain, you have a Cade McNown who just pisses everybody off when he steps on the field. That's what this rivalry's been missing.
What do you think, Eric? You're wearing your UCLA shirt today. I assume that's because you knew this topic was coming up.
It's a little dark. It's a little darker blue than UCLA.
Okay.
So I think where it comes from, and a lot of these is the big rivalries now are typically between teams playing for national championships, right? And I think if you go back to when this thing started to change the feeling, it did become when college football only became you're successful if you win the national championship, and that's it. And it used to be if you win the city, that's still something you can hang your hat on. If you go to the Rose Bowl, that's a great season. And then it became none of that matters. As soon as you lose a game, none of the rest of the games really matter all that much. Yeah, you'll play this one at the end. And you did have people that held on to that, and it meant a lot. But I think for the kids playing in it, right? Like they over the years had become so conditioned to, we got to win a chip, we got to go to the Natty, and like that was it to start the year. And now when you add in transfer portal guys and guys who didn't grow up in Southern California, and you ask them like, hey, what does this rivalry mean? And it's like, it's the next game. And there is part, right? Coaches have done that too. Like games are not special. You play the next one the same way. You don't get too high. You don't get too low. And there is like an understanding of sort of that kind of mentality, because if something goes wrong in the first 5 plays of the game, you can't have guys just go in the toilet and give up. So you got to be able to keep them sort of even killed. You understand that a little bit. But yeah, that to me is kind of what's taken a lot out of this rivalry. But no, going back to it, I mean, this again, we talk about like the uniform games. If these two teams are on the field and you're a college football fan, you're watching this one to see what happens and the players involved in it, because there were always great players on both sides. And I know Chris, being a huge UCLA fan like you are and wanting the best for them in all situations, it's good for you to hear. So no, but I think, you got guys like flipping back and forth between the two programs, playing for one team one year and another team the next year. It kind of changes things a little bit. Chip Kelly not really caring about college football or if his team did well or had players or anything like that changed things. And USC obviously having their kind of coaches previous to this one. But I think Deshaun Foster, like, he clearly knows where it is. I think he is going to get kind of the energy going there a little bit to where he's going to know going into the USC game what it means for UCLA. You're going to hear him, I think, talk about, we got to get ready for this one. This is a big one for us. We're going to put everything that we have into it. and maybe that sort of charges this one a little bit. But yeah, going like seeing people at the games, driving to the game and just seeing USC flags, UCLA flags, all of that all kind of coming together, whichever stadium you're going to. That just it makes it a fun day to experience everything there is about those two programs. And yeah, you hope maybe with 12 teams now going to the playoff, like this one can go back to meaning more to set you up. I don't know, but I do think that kind of you win the national championship or you throw the season away. That mentality that kind of crept into it, I think that like hit the rivalry games like this when maybe one team wasn't very good that year, hit that more than anything else.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Um, some of us still think that the rivalry games matter, even if you're not going to win the national title. Look, if the only thing that matters is winning a national title, then even the best program is going to do that once every 10 or 12 years on average, even the very best programs. And Michigan won their first one in like half a century. So I guess you would say that the last half century Michigan football doesn't mean anything, which is ridiculous. I think that's part of it. I think the other part is that there was a time when UCLA and USC were much fiercer rivals in recruiting. USC has recruited out of state so much recently, and UCLA recruited so badly under Chip Kelly that sort of changed things, right? SoCal kids used to be, they're going to go to one or the other, and UCLA would get enough of those guys that you would have elite players on both sides that grew up playing against each other in high school and sometimes junior All-American. I mean, Bob Toledo had a #1 overall recruiting class when he was at UCLA head coach. Can you imagine UCLA having a top-ranked recruiting class nationally now? Terry Donahue recruited some dudes. Those UCLA teams in the late 80s, mid 80s, they had some guys. You had Aikman and you had Carnell Lake and you had
Jonathan Baldwin. I mean, they had some dudes.
they had some guys, right? And so, and in those days, part of the reason that Aikman versus Pete meant so much in 87 and 88 is because both teams were loaded with talent. I mean, both teams were loaded with talent. It wasn't just the quarterbacks. You had all kinds. You had Mark Carrier in Cleveland, Coulter. You had Junior Sale and Tim Ryan and Scott Ross and those UCLA. And in 87, all those guys I mentioned at USC, great players. In 87, UCLA was clearly the better football team going into that game. They were loaded with guys, right? And they were a top 10 team. They were a 9-1 team coming into that game. So those games were enormous. USC and UCLA, for the rivalry to be meaningful, one is they both have to be better than they've been. And the second thing is they have to care about it. I think you're right. Deshaun Foster is going to care about this game, right? I mean, I remember watching Deshaun Foster as a freshman carve up a USC defense at the Rose Bowl. And Deshaun Foster grew up in Southern California when the rivalry mattered. He played in it. He cares about this game. I don't know how many of USC's players from all across the country care about this game. I don't know. Last year, it didn't look like any of them did. So you can say what you want about all of the games matter, but some of them do matter more than others. And if I had to list my top 25 USC football moments over my lifetime, I would guess probably 10 of them would be USC UCLA games. It just so this is a rivalry that should matter more than it has the last few years. And while I don't want UCLA to be good, thank you very much, I do want the rivalry to be good.
Now, that last point you touched on, I think, is the biggest difference in the whole thing. The recruiting. There's more and more kids that are coming from all over the country. It's not coming from your backyard anymore. When a big chunk of your roster is from Texas and Georgia and the East Coast or wherever, yeah, you don't have that. Hey, I grew up playing against that kid, across the street. I don't like him. It's missing. I mean, you got Kyle Ford playing for USC one year, UCLA the next year, and he's back at USC. That's weird.
It is weird. And he apologized, and I appreciate the apology, but still, it's weird. It's not natural. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. I don't think UCLA is going to be very good this year, and their schedule is absolutely brutal. But that's still a game that matters for the fans. I hope. I really, when Lou Holtz went to Notre Dame, he would teach the Notre Dame players about the USC rivalry, and they'd have to take a test. And I know that's not the way most coaches. That's not the way Pete Carroll talked about the rivalry, right? Every game's the same. That's what Pete said. But his players didn't act like every game was the same when they were playing UCLA or Notre Dame, did they? Did they look like, oh, this is just like playing, San Jose State or Cal? That's not how they acted. So I know that's what he said. I don't think it was true. I'm not suggesting Lincoln Riley has to give his players a test about the UCLA rivalry. I do think that the guys that know about this rivalry, the BMWs, people like that who have been around this rivalry, should explain to the players how much this means. It's a huge part of USC's football tradition. It means a great deal to the fans, especially because you can't escape Bruins. I mean, in Texas, I can largely, although there's so many Californians in Dallas now that I can't escape them entirely. But, in growing up in Southern California, you couldn't escape them. They're all over the place. Your friends, your relatives. I mean, so losing that game really, really hurt in a way that losing other teams didn't. Any other thoughts on the Bruins?
Was Deshaun Foster on that Bob Toledo team that had that hurricane game against Miami where they were everything until that game? Was he part of that?
He was a freshman. He was a freshman in the Cade McNown, the game at the 34-17 game at the Rose Bowl where we now ran the bootleg at the end of the game. And destroyed UCLA's football program forever with that dastardly deed. He was a freshman in that game, and he went off for like 150. He was something.
No, you're right. He remembers what it was like when UCLA owned USC, so to speak. So
yeah, when the game really mattered, and not just to USC and UCLA fans, but just sport fans throughout Southern California and outside.
What if UCLA won that game against Miami? What if that game doesn't get moved to the end of the year? What happens to that program?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Toledo was on top of the world for a little while.
Say Bob.
Yeah. Where is he now? Anybody know where Bob Toledo is now? Should we do a "Where is he now" segment on Bob? Is he still coaching? All right. Well, I'll have to look that up when we're done. It's not important enough for me to look it up right now. All right. Let's go to our last topic. What's the underrated storyline for this USC team? Eric, what is it?
I don't know that there's one that jumps out immediately. I do think, and now we've talked about this so much, but going back to spring, what I thought was I think people are underestimating the absolute canyon in coaching ability between Alex Grinch and Dan Lin and the new staff, sorry, that came in. I think the idea of like, oh, they got to play a little bit better defensively. They're going to be playing like a new sport defensively. Like this is something you hear again, kind of from players, from coaches, from people in the program, from people who have played for these guys before, like the NFL mindset that they bring to coaching and understanding scheme and what they're asking and teaching and all of that. Like it is a massive change for this group. And so in terms of like a specific, maybe underrated line, I'm really looking forward to what I think could be like big time redemption stories for, there's probably more than this, but I'm going to go 3 specific defensive players. And again, last year was so bad that I know there's going to be like some groans, but Jalen Smith, Mason Cobb, Bryson Shaw, 3 guys who last year, I think very clearly out of place, misuse, asking to do things, just kind of confusion. I think those guys can play a little bit in this defense, and I think it'll be kind of interesting how they're used and what they're asked to do. And I think you're gonna get a look at three different players in this defense. Again, are they starting? Are they leading the team in tackles and interceptions? I'm not gonna go there. But with the way at some points, almost everyone on the defense, maybe Anthony Lucas in there too, with what USC got out of him last year and this year. But I think like those sorts of stories where USC fans were ready to throw those guys away last year, right? It's them, they're not making plays, all of that. I think their sort of potential comeback this year is like a little micro story within the USC defense.
I like that. Mark, what do you think? What's the underrated storyline for this 2024 USC team?
Yeah, look, I'll just try and supplement what Eric said because he kind of took all the salient points. I think people are going to be surprised at how physical this team can actually be. We talked about the size that they've added, during the offseason. I think that's underrated. I don't think it's being talked about enough to the point where everyone thinks, hey, you know what? USC will probably be okay for the first half of the game. They might hang around for the first three quarters, but can they play 60 minutes on that side of the ball? That's the concern that everybody has right now. And I think USC, to what Eric talked about, you had players who suffered last year because they were in a bad system. You had Bryson Shaw, Anthony Lucas, Mason Cobb. What did we hear from? Well, we've heard it from Mason Cobb on a couple of occasions that, it feels good to know that they have a coach that knows how to use them now. So just the fact that this team is going to look like they know what they're doing, I don't know if it's underrated, but I think it's going to open up a lot of eyes. Like, all right, USC isn't going to be as easy of a game as we thought it was going to be. That win total of 7 or 8 games, we're probably underestimating this team.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all those points. I think the underrated storyline is Lincoln Riley coaching for his reputation this year. You remember when USC hired Lincoln Riley, it was an enormous coup, right? A shock to everybody, except McKinney, who actually put him on the list of candidates. I think I made fun of Eric for doing it. It was a shocking thing because that was the best young coach in the game, and everybody who had a coaching opening would have wanted him. LSU hired Brian Kelly, who's a really good football coach. They did not want Brian Kelly. They wanted Lincoln Riley. That's the guy they tried to land. For Lincoln Riley to go from that to where he is just a couple of years later has been a pretty dramatic fall. It's his fault. It's his fault that he's there. He threw away last season for reasons we don't need to talk about anymore. But this is a guy, he's not coaching for his job. I don't care what silly SEC honks who somehow have talk radio shows are telling you that Lincoln Riley's going to be fired after this year. That's stupid. That broadcaster is more likely to be fired after this year than Lincoln Riley is. He's not coaching for his job, but he sure is coaching for his place in the sport. Is Lincoln Riley one of the top 2 or 3 young coaches in the country? Is he a guy who can coach for the next 20 years and compete for national titles? Or is he a glorified offensive coordinator? That's the question. And a lot of the country has concluded he's just a glorified offensive coordinator. Now, he did all the right things in this offseason. He hired an unbelievable defensive staff. I can't complain about a single one of those hires. It is an incredible group of coaches, which means if USC can't play defense this year, there's only one guy you can point the finger at. It's not D'Anton Lynn. It's not Matt Ince. It's not Eric Henderson, right? It's not Doug Belk. It's not Sean Nua. If USC can't play defense this year, it's because Lincoln Riley is a glorified offensive coordinator, not a head coach. That's the reality. I think they will play defense this year. I think Lincoln Riley has learned the hard way. Like those shows where they take the teenagers who are guilty of shoplifting, they show them in prison. I think to scare them straight, I think Lincoln Riley was scared straight by the last 6 games of last year. And if he wasn't, I don't know. I mean, how much more gore can you see? That's like taking the teenager down to the local jail and Hannibal Lecter is there. You know, he's all masked up and you meet him, right? It's about the scariest thing you're going to see. If that isn't scary as straight, I don't know what will. I think Lincoln Riley's going to come out of this okay. And I think at the end of this year, people are going to say, he changed his program, he changed his philosophy, he figured out how important it is to play good defense, and his teams are playing good defense. I think that's going to be the conclusion. But if I'm wrong about that, I don't know where Lincoln Riley goes from here. And I don't know what vision he tries to sell the defensive recruits on the recruiting trail. So to me, that's the big storyline of the year.
And he's going to have to ride it out, I think, because if they do play pretty good defense, the national sort of pundits who have piled on before the year, they're going to give the credit to Dan Lynn, right? And Lincoln's going to have to just be okay with that until you have a couple years or potentially a couple coordinators that you've played solid defense under. The flip side being, if USC's defense is not good this year, Dan Lynn is not going to get the blame, right? He's already kind of established he can put a good defense together in 1 year. That blame, you're right, will absolutely land 100% on Riley there.
Yep.
I was saving that answer for question number 8, but I'll hold on to it.
Okay. Do you want to regurgitate it in a couple minutes, or do you want to think of a new one?
I'm just saying I had that type of answer prepared, but I know the 10 questions are coming up, and
I'm sorry, Mark. If you would have told me what you were going to say, I would have not spoken my piece. Okay, look, let's get to Arledge's 10 questions. Apparently, Mark has been building for this for quite some time. Did you lose last week, Mark? I think you lost last week, didn't you?
depends who you ask.
Okay, well, I'm asking you. Did you lose?
I'm a winner in my book every week, so
Okay, and you are to me too, Mark. You are a winner.
it's that
Okay.
scout team attitude.
Yeah. And you are currently on the scout team for Arledge's 10 questions. Speaking of winners, question number 1. Who is the best punt returner and the best kick returner in USC history? Eric McKinney, start us off.
The best punt returner will be Zachariah Branch when he's done. I'm not giving that to him right now. So the best punt returner for me in USC history is Reggie Bush. And a lot of it goes back to what you had said, where when you can physically see the kicker like shaking before the snap comes back to him, you've already done a very good job as a punt returner. So for me, it's Reggie Bush. Kick returner, it's Anthony Davis for me.
Mark, you have different answers than that?
Well, I didn't, but I will.
Well, you don't have to. Those are my answers also. If you just want to give those answers, I'll give you a point. I'll give you a point if that's what you want.
Well, you asked for best punt returner, best kick returner. Look, Reggie Bush is a really easy answer. What he did in that game against Oregon State in the fog, that's freaky. But we got O'Dory Jackson, who's right there also. I mean, that's somebody who, yeah, I mean, how do you say O'Dory, you're second best? I think he has more punt return for touchdowns than Reggie Bush.
He did. His numbers were slightly better career-wise than Reggie's.
Now, kick returner, it's an easy answer.
But Mark,
you're saying but. Nothing ever good comes from the butt, Chris.
Well, maybe not, but here's my issue with that. And the reason I picked Reggie, and you were going to pick Reggie too, so I'm not beating up on you.
Sure.
O'Dory's best punt return moment was against Notre Dame in a blowout game, right? Reggie had multiple punt returns that turned around games for undefeated teams. Absolutely. Oregon State, Stanford, right? He had big time returns that changed everything for a team with everything on the line, which is why I have him number 1.
Look, that is it's the right answer. There's really no wrong answer, but if you have to, lean one way, you're going to say Reggie Bush, because Reggie Bush could also do it on kickoffs. I mean, if you have to pick one guy to do it all, that's your dude. But you asked specifically, AD, you're going to give the kickoff guy to. He killed Notre Dame.
He had 6. He had 6 kick return touchdowns. I mean, you can't.
Reggie Bush, it's Anthony Davis. It's 1-1.
I think that I think there's some other guys who deserve. We mentioned a few already. I mean, you had some other guy. RJ Sauer is a fantastic kick returner, fantastic. And again, underrated. Except I love the guy, bring him up all the time. And so that was another great return man. You had Curtis Conway, a really fantastic return man. So you've had some other guys. You had. Before my time, I wish Greg was here to throw out his name because he's one of the leaders in all the stats. Anyway,
Mike
okay,
Battle as a punt returner is a guy that gets
Battle. That's exactly what I was thinking about. Okay, it's 1-1. You both got the right answer. Here's a harder question. Are you ready, Mark?
I'm ready.
If Zachariah Branch and Bear Alexander switched positions, who would have the better season?
So I recently just saw a video of a New York Giants lineman. I mean, literally sprinting downfield in a pursuit. And he made the tackle on a guy who was much smaller than him. I'm thinking Bear Alexander probably would have more success playing tight end wide receiver, lining him up somewhere on the offensive line to go out catching passes, than Zachariah Branch would have playing defensive tackle. Zachariah might sneak between someone's legs on occasion and get to the quarterback, knock down the running back. I think Bear would be have a little more success playing on offense than Zachariah playing defensive tackle. Just a gut feeling I have.
Okay, Eric, you agree with that?
well, so I have to go the other way, right? We can't go 1 through 10 where we all agree.
I hope not.
So Zachariah Branch, if he has to line up there, like we saw last year, there's a lot of defensive calls where you can have a defensive tackle 40 yards downfield trying to cover a wide receiver. So I'm going to run that defense, right, where he just drops out of there immediately. And now I've got kind of a spy rover with Zachariah Branch. The other thing that tips it this way too is you're right. Bear Alexander's got to be your number one punt returner at that. If they're switching positions, and I think Bear's very athletic. I don't need him back there trying to catch and return punts. That's where things really tip the other way. So I think Zachariah's got, right, he's got maybe a quarterback spy sacking him where he drops back and then rushes. I think maybe he's got an interception in there. I don't know how many deep balls Bear Alexander is getting on the other end of if you line him up in the slot.
Yeah, I think just about every corner in the Big Ten is going to be able to run with Bear. I do think, though, that we've forgotten that, no blocky, no Rocky. Having Bear Alexander outside blocking for maybe one of these bubble screens, maybe have him crack blocking. I know that you can't get away with that much anymore, but crack blocking, I mean, that's a weapon. That's a weapon. With Alex, first of all, with Branch, you're right that if you're going to drop him into coverage the way USC likes to take their best pass rushers and drop them into coverage over and over again, I think Branch could do some things. I also think you could have some interesting stunts with him, right? If he's tearing around the end, all of a sudden there's this 180-pound guy who's running a 4.3 around the end. That might pose problems too. But I don't love him on the goal line. I don't love that at all. So you both get a point. You both fought hard for your position. I liked it. It's still 2-2. Lincoln Riley made many changes in the program this offseason. What's one change you'd still like to see him make? Eric?
I like the idea of a former head coach, a guy who's done it for a long time, sort of coming in as an analyst. You've seen coaches do that all the time. Like I do not need Lincoln Riley to give up play calling. I don't need him to take himself out of the offense at all. But having a guy who's done it and, the clock management sort of master and all of that stuff up there, just sort of whispering whatever. And he may say, no, none of that. No, I don't want that. I don't want that. But to get like another person's opinion, a guy who's been successful and all of that, sort of in the program, I don't think it's ever hurt a program to bring that in, and you've seen a bunch of different guys do that. So I think he's made a lot of right decisions. You go back to like the facility was kind of seems like really kick started by him and pushed the recruiting department, all of that stuff. I think there's a lot of good decisions he made. I think that's kind of an interesting one still on the table.
Yeah, I like that. Mark, what do you got?
Wouldn't mind seeing Pete Carroll hanging around. Look, I'm going to be real selfish about this. I'd love more media access without a gag order. I know what to say, know how to say it, I know what information not to give up. Coach, take that next step.
Well, I'm not going to reward selfishness, Mark. I'm just not.
It's for the benefit of the.
No, you're right. Look, I would love it if we had that sort of unlimited access. I actually agree with Eric and Mark. You made plain what I was thinking when he was talking. It's hard to imagine how having someone like Pete Carroll around the program, where you can pick his brain, you can have him, you can bounce thoughts off him, you can ask him advice about difficult scenarios. You can talk to him. You can have him go shake the hands of boosters who need to give a lot of money. And maybe he tried to bring Pete in. I don't know. Pete, it sounded like Pete still wanted to coach, and so maybe he doesn't want to do something like that. Maybe he doesn't have the time for it. It just seemed to me from the beginning that if you can get Carroll involved in the program in really any capacity, it's a good idea. There's no way Lincoln Riley has had a lot of success as a head coach. I think he's going to be very successful. There's no way that he knows everything. And Pete Carroll, if you can't land Nick Saban to come hang out in the building, landing Pete Carroll is probably the best thing you can do. And he knows Southern California, and he knows USC. It would have been an absolute home run. Okay, Eric gets the point. 3-2. Most overrated college football player of your lifetime, Mark Holcomb.
I really don't like these type of questions, but I'm going to go Terrell.
I don't care, Mark. I don't care.
I don't like calling players busts. That's where I'm going with that.
Well, it doesn't have to be a USC guy.
I'm not picking a USC guy.
Okay, well, you can call UCLA guys busts. What's your problem? Come on.
But careful though, Chris loves all those guys.
Right. You're wearing a UCLA shirt tonight. All right, go ahead.
I'm going to go Terrell Pryor, the guy who was supposed to be the greatest quarterback to ever play high school football. He was going to change the landscape at Ohio State, and he didn't change anything. I mean, he was not good. I think he ended up playing wide receiver in the NFL for the Raiders for a year, and I don't know what happened after that.
Okay, Terrell Pryor. I did not expect that. Eric McKinney, what do you got?
I've got two categories for this because I wasn't exactly sure. So I like to be prepared, right? So there's I'm
taking the point. Just give me the point, Chris.
He doesn't he doesn't say two answers. It's two categories.
Two categories.
What does that mean?
So there's the most overrated college football player of my lifetime, like the guy who was really, really successful, but I don't think as good as people think he was. Then there's the guy who was overrated coming in and did nothing. So for me, that first category is Tim Tebow, where right, the attitude and all of that, I get it. As a football player, no, not to where he's the best quarterback of all time, top 2 college quarterback of all time. I can't go there. The other side, Jimmy Clausen would be it as the next coming. And then, yes, all of that.
Yeah, Jimmy Clausen. Oh, go ahead. Yes. Yeah, and the stretch of limo and the College Football Hall of Fame announcement. Jimmy Clausen's a good answer. Ron Paulus, another Notre Dame quarterback, also a very good answer. The difference is that I don't know that, like, Jimmy Clausen was just an arrogant buffoon. I mean, I've never met him. That's how he came off, right? I mean, just embarrassing over the top, which was perfect with that head coach of theirs. He and Charlie were quite a pair. Whereas Ron Paulus was just the victim, I think, of over-the-top expectations. Multiple Heisman winners, multiple national titles, and then he goes out and he's just okay. He's just okay. That's all he ever was. I also think it's interesting. The Tim Tebow call, I also thought of Tebow myself. It's funny when you talk about the best quarterbacks in college football history, Tim Tebow, on resume value, Tim Tebow's up there. Matt Leinart is up there. Tommy Frazier is up there. And while all those guys were fantastic college players, you also look at every single one of them and say, okay, but I've seen other guys that can, throw the ball better, for example, right, than all those guys. But they certainly won a lot of games, all three of them.
Ken Dorsey, quarterback at Miami, is another one you can put on that list that you were just rattling off.
Yeah, Ken Dorsey is actually a step below those guys, right? Because Ken Dorsey played on incredible teams, and nobody thinks of Ken Dorsey as, Ken Dorsey's like in the Gino Torretta class, where you look at it and say, incredible football team surrounded by amazing talent. That guy wasn't very good. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Ken Dorsey had a resume. It's just nobody thinks he was very good. Okay. I hesitate to reward Eric McKinney for not answering the question, so I'm going to give the point to Mark, even though I liked what Eric had to say. It's now 3-3. We're going to question number 5. Which former USC football player should have a reality show? Eric McKinney.
This is a tough one. A lot of good personalities here. So to limit my focus, I immediately went offensive line, right? Offensive linemen are different, like in how they approach life and all of that. I think you need a guy with that kind of attitude and charisma. So I'm going Ryan Khalil as a personality to lead really whatever, right? You got a bunch of different reality shows. You've got like the game show type stuff. You've got like the personal interest type things. I think he's a kind of multi-dimensional guy that could stretch it out a lot. You saw the thing he did with Will Ferrell. He's got the sense of humor. He's got the communication ability as the former center. So I'm giving him a mic, letting him pick a show to run and let him go.
That's a solid answer, and I didn't see it coming. Mark, what do you got?
I'm gonna go with the guy in the backfield. I'm gonna take Lendale White, and he's got no filter. I know I'm gonna get exactly what he's thinking at the moment. There's not gonna be any ambiguity. I'm gonna tune into that. I'm gonna watch that every week. Jimmy Lendale White. I need to see him throwing somebody off the top of a building. That should be his intro.
Anybody in particular? So I like both those answers. I would also like to see a Clay Matthews reality show, because if they have one of those Wedding Crasher style football games at between the whole family, I'd like to see that one. That would be just to see all of the Matthews, all of them. There's so many of them, all of them good. That would be fascinating to watch. 2 good answers. This game's still tied up. I'm very excited. I mean, both of you are at the top of your games. It's 4-4. Question number 6. You can be at one concert in history. Which one do you choose? Mark, go.
So I'm gonna see if I can fit this in here. There was something called A Day on the Green. This was a concert series that they used to do up there in Oakland during the summer. And they have 1977. I was only 10 years old, but if I can go back and be 10 years old and I say, Mom, Dad, drop me off here, this is what I get to choose from. On day 1, Fleetwood Mac, the Doobie Brothers, Gary Wright. Day 2, Steve Miller, the Eagles, Heart, the Atlanta Rhythm Section, Foreigner. Day 4 and 5, that was day 2 and 3, by the way. Day 4 and 5, Peter Frampton, Leonard Skinner, Santana, and the Outlaws. I have to pick a day out of that.
That's a good lineup.
That's a great lineup.
And you know what I like about that? You could have done the easy one. You could have said Woodstock, right? But you didn't. You didn't. You went in and you found one that people don't know about. You give us that lineup. That's the kind of excellence I expect from you, Mark Holcomb.
Scout teamwork, man.
Yeah, you're plugging away. McKinney, can you beat that? I can't imagine you can.
No, right? I mean, why? So I like when he said that, I was gonna say, look, you lose points for saying Woodstock, but that's the easy one, right? That's
Right.
the one you'd want to be at. So I obviously am not gonna pick that, even though I think that's the answer. I would say the Beatles, the rooftop concert. I think being there for that one.
See, Mark's just upset because he knows that's pandering to the judge. You could have said Beatles Candlestick Park, their last show too. I like all
Shea Stadium, he would have won, right? I mean,
Shea Stadium. He could have said one of the Beatles' random shows at the Cavern before they broke big, all of which would have been good. He also could have said the concert where Milli Vanilli got caught actually lip syncing. That would have been fantastic. You had the horrible tragedy where the Rolling Stones had Hell's Angels as security and things went south, which it's hard to imagine. All of them.
Why would you want to be at that one?
In the back, not
right?
in front.
Okay, sure.
Mark Hogan gets the point. I think everybody knows he's going to get that point. Better career, Al Pacino or Robert De Niro? Eric McKinney.
So this is an interesting one. I had to go a couple different ways of approaching this, right? I think if I had to pick a random movie from one of them, I would go De Niro. I think I enjoy his movies more. I know Al Pacino has the Any Given Sunday speech. He doesn't have I have nipples, Greg, could you milk me? Like he doesn't have that line. But all you said was better career. And I think Pacino carried more movies and did more with his roles than De Niro did with his. So I would prefer to watch De Niro stuff. I think Pacino has had the better career.
All right. Mark, you agree with that?
Yeah, look, if we're comparing towards the end of their careers, Al Pacino is bowing out much more gracefully than Robert De Niro. Al Pacino, him and De Niro, they both did The Godfather, but I like Al Pacino's role a lot more in The Godfather. You got Scent of a Woman. I mean, that is one of the greatest lines ever. And they were both in the movie Heat together. Well, who are you rooting for in that movie? Al Pacino or Robert De Niro? I knew who I was rooting for.
Yeah. Look, I didn't know how this one would go. You go on the internet, you have people arguing this, and you have all kinds of arguments both ways. Both legendary careers. I'll say this: I also went Pacino just because when Pacino is doing his over-the-top Pacino thing, whether it's the Colonel in Scent of a Woman, where he gets up and gives his over-the-top speech, or he does something similar, Devil's Advocate. He does it all the time. Al Pacino, when he just does over-the-top Pacino, I just find, and I know a lot of people don't like it, I find it absolutely fascinating. I love over-the-top Pacino. And De Niro, who I think can be very funny, and I don't remember Pacino being very funny. Maybe he's a little more diverse. I don't know. But I just, Pacino getting up and going off on the school when as the blind colonel in that film. Yeah, I just don't think De Niro can beat that. So I think Pacino is the right answer. You both get a point. It's Culkin 6, it's McKinney 5. The fans talk a lot about their expectations for this coming season, but what do you think the expectations are with Riley and staff? Like deep down inside, if they're just talking with each other, what do you think they believe this team is capable of doing? Mark, go.
Yeah, like I said, I had my answer for this. I'm looking for growth from Lincoln Riley, from the staff. If you see the improvements on defense, that's going to be a clear-cut sign that Lincoln Riley has turned the page. He's become a man. He's 40 years old now. He understands what it takes to be a head coach. And I think that's what the fans want to see from Coach Riley this year. They know what he's capable of doing from the offensive side of the ball. The expectation, the anticipation is seeing Lincoln Riley take that next step that you guys talked about earlier in the show. Show the growth. And if that happens, I think the fans, their expectations will be met. Doesn't matter. Everybody wants the wins. They want to see USC, get as far as they can in the season. But if they see that type of that development that you saw in year one with Pete Carroll's team when he took over, that's going to go a long way. You don't need to see USC losing games by 6 points or less every week, but just see the type of development you saw on a week-to-week basis.
Okay. So Eric, we come on here every week and we write articles. At least I do occasionally. You guys do all the time, and we talk about our expectations for the program. Lincoln Riley and staff aren't going to come out directly and tell us what they really think this team is capable of, and they haven't told you, so you don't have any inside information. What do you think? When Lincoln Riley sits down with his staff, what do you think those guys really think this team could do?
I think there's a micro macro answer to that, right? Micro, I think in terms of game to game, what you're doing on the field, cutting right MAs, missed assignments, and busts in half or by 75%, specifically on defense. Like having to go over film every week and see 3 guys in the same gap because 7 guys don't know where they're going and all of that, like that can't happen as much this year. And I think that's a big point defensively. It's why you kind of slow play install, why you're going to talk about communication. And I think that is huge. And I think they do feel good about how they're going to play defensively, just in terms of that, just in terms of, is the guy going to be where we expect him to be? And I think they feel good about that. I think that then turns into, I think they go into this season with real thoughts about a potential playoff run, because you don't need to be in the Big Ten championship game to be one of the 12 teams. You're going to get 3 Big Ten teams in the playoff. Potentially, if things break all right and everyone beats up on Notre Dame in the Big Ten, potentially you get 4 teams from that conference. So you don't need to win the conference. You don't even need to go to the championship game. You can sort of, you're not going to pick and choose them, but you can lose to LSU. You can probably lose another one as you go and still be solid enough, win all your home games. And that, right, LSU, Michigan, and I'm going a little bit away from what they think and kind of putting my thought, but LSU, Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, you go 2-2 against that group and then win kind of the games that maybe you should win. Yeah, I don't think there's any reason they would need to go into this as a, boy, I hope we can tread water and play well enough. I think you can go into this thinking, they can get into that 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. We don't know. I think that's probably the way to look at it. I think they all know that with a schedule like this and the question marks they have, that an undefeated season is extraordinarily unlikely. So although you want to win every game, I don't think they think that's really the ceiling. But I think they look at it and say, we play well, we can get to 10-2, and you win 10 and you're in. That's almost certainly the case, especially with this schedule. I think Eric answered the question. I don't think Mark did it. 6-6. Okay, 6-6, and this is where it gets. Look, this is a USC football program. And that's why a question like this makes so much sense. Who's the best professional wrestler in history? Eric McKinney, go.
I mean, obviously, I spent more time on this one than really the rest of the show combined. Like, this was my weekend for the last 72 hours. I'm not surprised. I'm not going to give you like a top 10 list or a top 3 or any of that kind of stuff.
10 wrestlers.
I'm gonna go. Look, you didn't say I had to explain why I'm not going to give a top 10. I just said I'm not going to.
I'm not criticizing you for just answering the question. I apologize.
I think the guy who took wrestling to its highest height and was the most visible guy during that time, maybe a surprise, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Ah, okay. That may be right. That was after I mean, I was too old to watch wrestling at that point, but I know the name. I know the stick, so you're probably right. Mark Holkin, what do you got?
I'm a little ticked off right now that Eric jumped right into my answer. But anyway,
Really?
yeah, really. He didn't tell you why he picked Stone Cold Steve Austin,
He did
but
not.
no, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because he never changed character. He is who he is. He did not give a rip. It was him versus everybody. It didn't matter if you were the son or the daughter of the owner of the company. He was going to tell you to your face, you suck. He was going to crack a beer right over your head. That's why Stone Cold Steve Austin was the greatest wrestler of all time.
Huh? You're both wrong, and here's the answer. All right. It's 6-6. If you don't know who that is, then you had no business answering this question in the first place. He's the best.
Did you just
It's
do?
6-6.
Did you just try and do the Ric Flair? Woo!
That was a Ric Flair. What do you mean tried to do? I nailed it.
I didn't come across.
It did come across. I mean, I think Eric McKinney just forfeited.
Oh, where did he go?
I don't know, but we have one question. Oh, actually, it's perfect because here's the last question. If you had to enter the witness protection program, what name, occupation, or location would you choose? I think Eric has already chosen, and I think he's on his way. What do you got, Mark?
You know what? First of all, if I told you, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of this thing, right?
I don't think you're going to need it, are you?
I won't, but if I do, I'm
Okay.
going to put myself in the place. First of all, I'm going to see them. I'm going to know if someone's coming after me. So just change my name to Major Tom. I'm going to be an astronaut. Stick me up there on the moon. I'll see you coming. I'll be okay.
I don't know if we have the technology to do that right now.
We have the International Space Station. You can plant
Do
me there.
have that. And if you go there, you may not come back, apparently.
That's another good thing. But at least, like I said, if my enemy's coming, I'll have enough time to prepare. It's going to take them. It's going to take them a couple of minutes to get there.
Hey, look, you must be a really important witness, and they must be trying to take down a really important defendant for you to say, "I'll testify, but you have to build me accommodations on the moon." Well, look, Mark, I didn't know that a moon answer would win the game today, but it just so happens that it did. You win this one 7-6 or by forfeit, however you want to look at it, because McKinney has dropped and has decided not to play anymore. I guess he was that upset about the wrestling answer.
Either that,
Okay.
either that, or he's attending to the news that just broke that Miller Moss has been named the starting quarterback.
Oh, did that just break? Or you
That
just
broke
you're just throwing that out
No,
there?
that just broke about 20 minutes ago.
Okay, well, that's a shocker. I think there's a chance that Bear Alexander and Zachariah Branch might play also. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. Hey, don't forget, 10 a.m. the Saturday before the game at the Palms. Ask whatever question you want. If you want to ask why these guys have all voted for Pacino instead of De Niro, you can ask that. If you want to tell Culkin that the moon answer was silly, you can say that. You can say whatever you want. We'll see you then. In the meantime, fight on, everybody.